I have always believed that the night holds a special power. It is a moment when reality blends with the unknown, where the boundaries between the everyday and the supernatural blur. Have you ever wondered what would happen if, on any given night, you encountered a passenger who was not of this world? That is the story I want to tell you, one that began on a cold night when I took the midnight shift as a taxi driver. The city lights shone brightly, but the fog of dawn seemed to conceal secrets that should never be revealed. As I turned the key in the ignition of my taxi, a chill ran down my spine, though I had driven during those hours many times before. The solitude of the road and the unsettling stillness that accompanied it were becoming part of my routine. But that night would be different. I picked up my first passenger at a deserted corner, a weary-looking man, wearing a hat that partially obscured his face. Without saying a word, he handed me the address, the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. In my mind, it was just another route, but something in the air sent a shiver down my spine. As I drove, the man didn't move a muscle. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A scent of damp earth flooded the cab, and before I could react, the passenger vanished from the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and to my surprise, there was no one there. Just a strong, penetrating fragrance of fresh, loamy earth that filled the air. My heart raced uncontrollably, and despite my attempts to rationalize what had happened, a palpable presence seemed to fill the void. After dropping off the stranger, I returned to the road. Yet, as the hours passed, the same scenario unfolded time and again. New passengers arrived, all requesting the same destination. Each of them, upon reaching the cemetery, disappeared just as the aroma of dampness and earth permeated the taxi. And with each encounter, I felt the mystery grow denser in the darkness. That cemetery, with its weathered gravestones and trees that whispered secrets, seemed closer than ever. It was as if the line between the living and the dead had blurred. I began to wonder how many of those passengers had arrived there without a clear purpose, and why, of all places in the city, they had chosen that one. As I drove on, a sense of unease began to swell within me. There was something more to this story, like a thread woven throughout time, drawing me in. So, as the shadows danced around me, I resolved to uncover the mystery behind these lost souls. The night enveloped me, and the sound of the engine roared like an echo of my growing anxiety. With each passenger lost, my curiosity grew stronger, like a magnet pulling me toward the hidden truth behind those souls. The next time I picked up a passenger, it was a young woman with a melancholic aura. She settled into the back seat and once again gave me the same address. As I drove toward the cemetery, I felt a connection with her, as if I could see the world's sadness reflected in her eyes. When we arrived, the air thickened. Just as I was about to ask if she was sure about getting out, the familiar scent of damp earth filled the taxi. Just then, the woman smiled and locked eyes with me, as if she could see right through a veil. "Do not fear," she said softly. "We are merely passing through." The phrase resonated in my mind as I watched her begin to fade away slowly. I couldn't understand what was happening. Who were they really? Why did they choose to return to that place? It was as if it were an endless cycle, a return to eternity, where the cemetery became their home. With each passenger, the story grew more intriguing and darker. I became determined to find answers. I returned to the cemetery after finishing my shift. The fog still enshrouded the place, and the silence was overwhelming. I began to wander among the graves, searching for answers among the inscriptions on the tombstones. I felt as though the shadows were watching me. I stopped in front of one that seemed older than the rest. It was the grave of a man named William Baker, who had died under mysterious circumstances. The lack of information about his life made me wonder if there was a connection to the passengers I was picking up. A cold breeze swept through me. Suddenly, the ground trembled slightly beneath my feet, as if the cemetery itself were trying to communicate something to me. That night, the sound of the wind howled, and every whisper seemed to carry the voice of those who had not found peace. And there, in front of William's grave, I realized that each of my passengers had something in common, a tragic fate that kept them tied to this world. My mind was filled with questions. Were they searching for something they had left behind? Or perhaps they sought justice for some hidden wrong. The feeling of being trapped between two worlds intensified, and I began to feel that I too was becoming a part of this story. The night cloaked me, and its mystery ensnared me further. It became an obsession, a personal quest to understand their pain and the reason they remained trapped in this cycle of fading away. As the weeks went by, my night shifts filled with extraordinary encounters. I returned to the cemetery in search of those souls who sought help. With each visit, each story I uncovered, I felt more connected to them. They were no longer just specters. They were human beings with tales begging to be heard. One night, while waiting at a corner, a vehicle sped by, casting a bright light over me. My heart pounded, and when the light faded, I saw a familiar figure approaching. It was the old man. His presence was clearer than ever, and this time, he was not alone. Other passengers surrounded me, as if they had chosen to reveal themselves. "Listen," the old man said, "not all who come here are lost. Some seek justice, and others redemption." As he spoke, the air grew thick with a profound silence. I felt the taxi filling with energy, as if the cemetery itself were awakening. The group of souls began to share their stories, each one more heart-wrenching than the last. They were tales of betrayal, lost love, and promises unfulfilled. The experience was intense. For hours, I felt as if I were in the middle of a novel, surrounded by tragic characters who shared their darkest secrets. I understood that my mission was to help them find the closure they so desperately sought. I turned my taxi into a refuge for those who no longer had a voice. Every time someone disappeared, I took notes, researched their lives to try to solve the mysteries of their existence. Sometimes there were answers. Other times, I simply let myself be carried away by the flow of the narrative. However, the weight of those stories began to affect me. The souls pressed down on my conscience, and I realized that I could not continue carrying this pain. So one night, while I was in the cemetery, I made a promise to those souls. I promised to help them find the peace they longed for. And so, my life changed completely. Each morning, the dawn still served as a reminder of the tumultuous and desperate nights, but also of the hope. From then on, every time someone got into my taxi, I knew they were not just a passenger. They were fragments of interconnected stories, searching for an end. So, dear friend, remember that in the shadows of the night, there is always more than meets the eye. Join me on this journey, and perhaps together we can unravel more hidden mysteries. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to give me a like and leave your comment on what you think. Your support is essential for continuing our exploration of these tales of terror and mystery together. I look forward to seeing you in the next tale.